Their cruel words echoed, promising false freedom. And HWA Rand stood on the edge, under the leaden sky, where his world ended. The wind fluttered his jacket like a harbinger of a fall. Through the glass wall, new promises and new temptations reached him. But in his eyes, full of horror, only the abyss was reflected. Below, on the asphalt, emptiness awaited. Every breath was difficult, every heartbeat echoed in my temples. "Hey, don't be afraid, it's only the third floor," a mocking voice came from below. They waited, cameras at the ready, their patience wearing thin. "I swear I'll push you off myself." The threat sounded like a death sentence. HWA Rand turned around, his gaze full of despair and an unspoken question. This is the last time, right?" His trembling voice was almost inaudible. My legs gave way, and I lost my balance. He tore the silence with a cry of horror. The decline, slow and inevitable, has become a reality. One last look up at the indifferent faces recording his agony, and a triumphant grin blossomed on the face of the one holding the camera. The sky swirled above him, taking away his last hopes. The world went dark, and here he lies, helpless, among the fragments of a broken life. The voices broke into screams, demanding help, begging for salvation. In the light of the operating lamp, the doctors' faces looked like ghosts fighting for their fleeting lives. Somewhere in the distance, an anxious voice was asking about the fate of his son, and only part of the answer was heard through the fog. Multiple fractures and shock plunged him into an abyss where time lost all meaning, and just one lonely tear slid down her cheek, testifying to the pain that lived deep inside. Suddenly, as if struck by thunder, HWA Rand's eyes widened, filled with insane terror. He sat up in bed with a jerk, his heart pounding in his chest, and the world around him was alien and unfamiliar. Ragged breaths echoed in the silence of the room as he looked at the ceiling, trying to comprehend reality. The vague outlines of the room took shape, and the first conscious question escaped my lips. Where am I? Only the monotonous swinging of the IV broke the viscous silence, counting down the moments of his new life. The withered flowers in the corner, dusty and forgotten, whispered of the passage of time and someone's lost hope. He slowly looked around the room, and with each passing moment the realization pierced him. So I. Clutching his face with his hands, HWA Rand screamed silently, one word escaping from his chest. Survived. Leaning back against the pillows, he let the tears flow, whispering through his relief. Oh shit, I'm so glad. The measured ticking of the wall clock was the only companion in this suddenly oppressive silence. A weak groan of pain or despair was lost somewhere, finding no response. The door to the room remained silent, as if cutting him off from the outside world. Finally, HWA Rand gathered his strength and called out in a weak voice, "Hey, is anyone there?" But the chamber responded only with a deep, deafening silence, absorbing his call. A chill of horror ran down his spine. He tried to scream, but no one heard him. Or he wasn't even here? A desperate attempt to lift his body resulted in only a painful slide across the cold floor. My gaze caught the gloomy silhouette of a wilted flower from which a familiar tie hung. Every inch of his being screamed in pain, and he couldn't understand why his own body had become so unbearable. In horror, he realized that what was happening was not just a nightmare. Can it be that he can't feel his legs? Reality fell upon him with all its monstrous weight. This was not a dream. Panic was mounting. He twitched, trying to make his limbs obey, but they remained completely motionless. A desperate cry escaped his lips, echoing off the walls of the empty room. The corridor responded only with dead, ominous silence, absorbing his every call. Exhausted, he caught his breath, realizing that there was no help to be expected from anywhere. His gaze slid to the closed door, behind which, it seemed, lay the solution to all this madness. It's time to act. There was only one way out, to get out of here, but for this I needed at least some kind of support. And then his gaze caught the familiar silhouette of an IV. With a strength born of desperation, he gripped the cold metal. Step by step, clinging to this fragile hope, he rose. Relief washed over him as he felt his legs finally obey. Each uncertain step was accompanied by the treacherous creaking of the cart. The door slowly gave way, revealing a path into the unknown. He looked down, and the darkness of the corridor greeted him with a new, chilling silence. The corridor was plunged into darkness. Only a few lamps glowed indifferently in the distance. In this ominous silence, every creak of the chair wheel echoed in the empty space. While Ron, trembling with fear, shouted into the void, hoping for at least some kind of response. His voice was lost in this abyss, and he tried again to call for help, but in vain. The fear grew as he realized his loneliness in this ominous place. Suddenly, a female figure appeared in the distance, standing motionless under the dim light. Relief was mixed with a new question. If there is someone, then why is no one answering? Huaran called out to the stranger cautiously, feeling a sense of foreboding growing inside him. And then his gaze fell on something terrible, a bloody hand from which scarlet drops were dripping. His heart sank in his chest as the reality of this nightmare began to sink in. At that moment, from the depths of the shadows, a terrible figure slowly emerged, hiding its horrors. It was a face distorted by pain and blood, a look of empty eyes frozen in an eternal scream. Huaran's eyes widened in unbearable horror, reflecting the entire horror of the situation. The instinct of self-preservation made him recoil, trying to find his balance. But the figure at the end of the corridor was no stranger. It was something from the darkest depths of hell. Horror pierced him to the very bones when he realized that the person in front of him was not alive. Without a second thought, Huaran started running, dragging the heavy stand behind him. Every glance back only increased his panic, for his pursuer was too close. He screamed, trying to understand what was happening in this nightmarish dimension he had ended up in. He had no time to think, only to desperately flee from imminent death. The door, the only barrier between him and the abyss. Ran rushed towards her, gasping for air, throwing his last strength into a dash. He saw it. But behind me, I could already hear terrifying steps, approaching inexorably, mercilessly. His fingers, convulsively clutching the handle, tried to lock this nightmarish reality from the outside. Startled by a premonition, he turned around and saw a bloody hand reach out from the darkness. And then a face of pure, nameless horror, screaming right at him. He desperately leaned on the door, trying to hold it open with his whole body. He pressed, resisted, feeling how every vein in his body was strained to the limit. The door shook under the blows, red flashes raining down around it like blood from a wound. A deep growl, full of impatience and ominous determination, came from behind the door. Then there was an eerie silence. Only the streaks of blood on the door indicated the recent fight. The creature moved away, its steps dying away somewhere in the depths of the eerie corridor, leaving him alone. Has she left? Or is she still waiting there? Whispered Ran, paralyzed with fear. Madness set in. Consciousness refused to believe what was happening. But what was that? Something dark and red flashed at his feet, causing another attack of panic. Feeling the icy cold on his back, Ran turned around, his eyes widening in shock. The monster didn't leave. It was here, right behind him, and next to it lay something broken, mutilated. And in the reflection of his pupil, dilated with unbearable horror, the monster grinned maliciously. Tears mixed with dirt and blood, dripping from his face, signifying complete collapse. The face of evil, absolute, primeval, now completely triumphed over its victim. Rand's eyes widened, reflecting the horror of nothingness. But this was not the end, but only an awakening in a new, even more nightmarish dream. Before him, another victim or predator, trapped in the cage of its own despair, writhed in madness. Finding himself on the cold floor, he tried to comprehend what was happening, but his mind refused to believe it. What is this place, and who are these creatures that were once people? The unexpected sound made his heart pound wildly. A dark rectangle slipped out of the monster's limp hand, a chance for salvation. Hope flashed in his eyes. He had to call for help before it was too late. But the monster, as if sensing his thought, growled again, approaching the bars. Ran swallowed hard and tried to suppress the rising panic. He addressed the creature with a pleading voice, as if trying to restore its human form. His trembling hand reached out to the side, to where his only salvation lay. The fragile device finally found its way into his palm. A scream of horror escaped his chest as the monster began to tear itself out of its cage with renewed vigor. The bars of the grate bent under the inhuman pressure, threatening to fly apart at any moment. The phone became his shield, his last chance to connect with the world of the living. "Run," the inner voice whispered. "Run as fast as possible, at any cost. Behind that door there could be freedom, or an even deeper abyss of despair." Carefully opening the door, he peered into the impenetrable darkness of the corridor. Every rustle made him flinch, and the old IV in his hands seemed like his last weapon. Step by step, Ran carefully moved along the gloomy corridor, only the dim light from the windows breaking the oppressive darkness. His battered, bloody face expressed genuine horror. Every nerve was stretched to the limit. For a moment he froze at the window, trying to see something behind the glass, but night enveloped the city. Suddenly, a terrible realization struck him, causing his blood to run cold. His eyes widened in shock, and a single drop of sweat rolled down his temple, mixing with the blood. At that moment, his phone vibrated, making a persistent, piercing sound. U-Origin message, the warning read, announcing mutated humans and the need to seek shelter. He looked down again, and the sight that met his eyes was worse than any nightmare: destruction and chaos in the streets. Overturned cars, traces of blood and silent ruins, it was all real. The alarm bell continued to ring, punctuating the deafening silence. Unable to bear it any longer, HWA Ran let out a piercing cry of despair and dropped the phone from his trembling hands. The fallen device automatically dialed the emergency number, 112. Through a haze of terror, he picked up the phone, pressing it to his ear in a last attempt to find salvation. Sitting on the cold floor, he prayed for someone to answer. "Oh God, just pick up the damn phone already." But instead of an answer from the speaker, he heard other sounds, heavy footsteps coming from somewhere below. With a sinking heart, HWA Asran leaned towards the window, trying to see the source of the noise. Down in the street, he saw a lone man running desperately, looking back with panic in his eyes. Without thinking, HWA Ran shouted, trying to get his attention, "Hey there, man." The man rushed to the nearest door, his hand frantically grasping the handle, trying to open it. But the door was locked, and he tugged at it in anger, realizing the hopelessness of his situation. A man dressed in hospital pajamas froze in panic as he heard the increasing noise. Outside, behind the glass door, another man was pounding on it in desperation, screaming for help. His face was distorted with horror and rage. He begged to open the door, warning of the approaching danger. Just a moment later, a glance behind him revealed that the reason for his fear was already very close. From the darkness of the corridor, distorted, bloodthirsty figures rushed towards him, thirsting for flesh. In a fit of panic, the man recoiled from the door, trying to escape the inevitable. But one of the monsters was already here, his bloody hand darting towards the glass that separated the worlds. HWA Ran, who was watching from inside, felt a chilling horror, but the thought of salvation was born in him. The eyes of a dead man, full of darkness, and a hand stretched out through the glass, a sight that makes the blood run cold. The man stumbled and fell, instantly finding himself under the onslaught of the merciless creatures. His face was twisted in pain and despair as the monsters bit into him. HWA Ran gripped the door handle tightly, his heart pounding and echoing loudly in his chest. He struggled to utter at least a word, his voice trembling, trying to reach the dying man. Suddenly, something different flashed across HWA Ran's face. Not just fear, but a shocking realization. The monsters continued to tear and torment their victim, blood gushing out like a fountain. HWA Ran's lips pressed into a thin line, and a strange, frightening glint appeared in her eyes. The pupil dilated, covered with a bizarre pattern, as if an ancient curse had emerged from the depths of the soul. The world around him distorted, slowed down, and for a moment the truth pierced the consciousness of the HWA Ran. His eyes turned completely black, bottomless, reflecting something more than just horror. And then he realized, these creatures, these monsters, it was them, those very same guys. Ho Ran fell to his knees, powerless. Kim Jun-ho, a desperate cry escaped his lips, his eyes darting around in panic. But in response, he heard only sarcastic laughter that echoed in the depths of his soul. The steps were approaching, slowly, inexorably, as if fate itself was following on his heels. Ghosts of the past whispered threats. "If you don't do everything right, you'll get it too," he pleaded, trying to justify that he had no choice, bowing to their inexorable will. A cold horror pierced him as he realized the hopelessness of his situation. A sinister grin flashed in the darkness, foreshadowing the inevitable retribution. He screamed that he didn't want it, that he didn't know that everything would turn out this way, but his words were drowned in the void. Their shadows thickened, surrounding him from all sides, driving him into a corner. "You're lying," a voice whispered from the darkness. "You knew it all perfectly well." "No," was all Hua Ran could manage to squeeze out, his body trembling with fear. They reminded him how glad he was that Lee Jun-hyuk had died in his place, allowing him to live out his school years in peace. "Don't pretend you have a conscience, you pathetic, selfish bastard," they sneered. "No!" His cry of pain and despair tore through the silence, his eye bloodshot. The wide-open mouth let out a silent cry, full of horror and unbearable agony. His face twisted in a grimace of unbearable pain, a scream caught in his throat. Suddenly, his hand reached out to a heavy object lying nearby. With a desperate burst of strength, he hurled the brick, aiming at his invisible tormentors. There was a dull thud, blood spurted, and a chilling whisper pierced him, "Murderer." Blood poured down his face, blinding and burning, while a silent, desperate scream tore from his chest. The crimson brick that had become the instrument of his curse lay silently on the ground, absorbing alien life. His hand, once clean, was now covered in a sticky, dark substance, as if death itself had touched it. Heavily weighed down by the realization, HWA Ran lowered his gaze, and the world around him began to blur into dark, fuzzy spots. From this darkness emerged the face of the victim, distorted with horror and pain, looking inexorably straight into his soul. He threw his head back, and an inhuman, piercing scream erupted from his throat, echoing in the emptiness of his newfound hell.